Greetings and salutations, and thank you for clicking on this video. Today we're going to talk about customizing your Bash environment. This video is going to be for intermediate to more advanced Linux users. Those of you who are familiar with the concept of editing text files, somebody who has worked in the terminal for a while may find this very useful, because what I'm going to show you today is going to add a lot of functionality to your experience as you use the Bash shell in a terminal. If you are brand new to Linux, I encourage you to go ahead and watch this video anyway, because you're going to learn about some of the possibilities and some of the things that you can do down the line to customize things should you choose to start working in a terminal. Somebody posted on one of my videos not too long ago that I shouldn't talk about the terminal, I shouldn't show it because it scares off new Linux users because they're afraid of the terminal. So before we get into the video, let me say, yes, you can load a Linux Mint or Manjaro or a Aurora, any one of those distributions that are designed to be very new user friendly, and chances are you won't have to open up the terminal much. But the Bash terminal is a big part of the Linux world. It is a big part of being part of the Linux ecosystem, and for a lot of people it is the main attraction because it is so powerful and it allows you to do things with your computer with just a few commands that would actually be very difficult to do in a GUI. You don't have to use the terminal, you don't have to learn it. But on the flip side, you don't have to be a programmer either to get something out of it. So I wanted to say that up front. And another thing I must say is that I am suffering from a cold, and I will try and keep the sniffing and snorting and coughing and hacking down to a bare minimum. But should I do so somewhere along the way in this video, please forgive me in advance. But I wanted to go ahead and do the video while all the information was nice and fresh in my mind and get it out there. A lot of people have expressed interest in this video, so I wanted to go ahead and do it. So do forgive me if I sound a little funny here. Okay, so let's jump into talking about what the environment is. When you open up a terminal, whether it be a terminal emulator like we have here, or whether you log into a TTY, however you get into your account, there is a whole big bunch of variables that get loaded in the background. And as you work in Bash, you can access those variables to do different things. It's simple things like your path statement, for instance, where the system is going to look for programs. It's all kinds of stuff in here. And if you want to look at your environment, you can print the environment. And the command is print env. And in this case, I'm going to pipe it into a pager to make it easier to deal with. And there's a whole bunch of stuff in here. It tells us a lot of cryptic information about how we have things set up. So here, for instance, you see the path statement. Here's your path statement. This is where the system is going to look for commands when you type them in. And you can add to the path statement. And you can also change things in here like the UMask, which is how files are assigned permissions when you create a file. So there's a whole lot here to deal with. We're going to be focusing on just two main things that you can do because I think they are the most useful. And we'll touch on other things as we roll along. This is by no means a definitive guide, ladies and gentlemen. This is definitely going to be an overview. The idea here is to introduce you to concepts, and then you can go off and do your research because this is all extremely well documented. This is also non-distribution specific, so whatever distribution of Linux you're using, you can take advantage of a lot of this stuff. Bash is Bash. It doesn't matter what operating system it runs on. It could be Linux, Unix, Mac, Windows, makes no difference. It is Bash. So the first thing that I want to talk about here is aliases. And they are really nifty little things that you can do to create commands, or you can redefine a command. And let me show you a really simple alias. So with aliases, you can, like I said, redefine a command. So what would we do with an alias? Well, we issue the alias command, okay, and this is the syntax. So we're going to give it the name of our command that we're going to do, and in this case we're going to do df. And the reason why we're going to do that is because this is a really good example of modifying a command. So if I issue df, which is disk free, you'll notice that it gives it back to me in 1 kilobyte chunks. So that's what those numbers mean. It's not very easily readable to a human being. I mean, if you can do real quick math in your head, you can break that down to megabytes and gigabytes. So what we're going to do is we are going to add this H flag to that. And what that's going to do is it's going to give us humanly readable output. Well, if every time that you issue the df command, you don't want to remember to actually put that H on there, then what you can do is to just simply alias the command and include that. So we'll do that real quick here. So it's alias df, and then it's equals, and then in single quotations, this is very important, df h, which is the command that we want it to be, and so we hit enter, we don't get any output, so it obviously worked. Now when I type in df, then it will always do it in humanly readable form. There are some advantages to using aliases this way, and there are some disadvantages. First of all, if I have an alias for a command that already exists, what if I need to run df and I don't want the humanly readable output? I have some crazy need to actually see it in blocks like that, in 1 kilobyte blocks, then, well, I'm kind of screwed. So that's something to keep in mind. It's actually much better to create a completely new file name if you're going to modify a command. So most Linux systems, Ubuntu systems already have this alias in here. Everybody knows about ls, okay? And when I type ls, then it lists the storage in my home directory. But what if I want ls to show me a more detailed view? Well, you probably know about ls and then l, okay? And that will give me a long listing of all the files. Well, if you're running an Ubuntu system, or maybe even many other systems as well, you might be able to just type ll. That's an alias for the ls command with the long function there, and it will give you a lot more output. Plus, the ll command shows you the dot files as well. So it's everything in a directory. Now, ll doesn't exist. It is an alias that is defined by the system. And so therefore you can't do a command, you can't do something like this and look for which ll. There's nothing there. It doesn't exist. So that's another downside to aliases. We can also use aliases to create new commands by putting commands together. So let's do that right now. Let me clear the screen here. And we will do alias. And I'm just going to call this command time date. Okay. And that alias is going to equal, single quotes, date, and then the cal command, which will print a calendar. And so let us define that alias. So now if I put in time date, it takes those two commands and sticks them together. So I can build aliases of a combination of short commands to come up with a long command like that. So that's kind of how aliases work. Now, we've played around with this, and I've created all those new aliases, but when I close my terminal, check this out, gang. They go away. Oops. Sorry about that. They go away. So I put df in, and I'm getting it in 1 kilobyte blocks again. That's because as soon as I closed the terminal, I logged out of my session and the changes to my environment went away. So if you want to do things like this and you want it to stick, then you're going to have to edit a file somewhere so that when bash boots up, it knows where to read to find all of this information. The bash terminal actually reads a lot of files to get that information that I showed you in print environment. Today we are going to focus almost exclusively on one file because this is the one that you're allowed to mess with, and if you mess it up, you can't trash your system. You can make mistakes here, things might not work right, but you haven't wrecked anything. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to go through all of the other different files to show you what they do, okay? So the file that we are concerned with today is .bashrc. So let us take a look at .bashrc. And to do that, I'm going to open it in a text editor. And I made the print huge here, so it's pretty easy to see. Now, as we scroll down through this file, you're going to see that there's a lot of stuff in here. And it defines pretty much everything about your bash session, what kind of prompt you have. Let's see what other kind of information we have in here. This is setting up the history right here, where it's making it so that we don't put duplicates in history. Then we define the history size at 1000. And then we have stuff in here about your prompt. If you want a color prompt, you can also change how your prompt works. I actually changed how my prompt works, and I'll show you that in a little bit. Okay, so if you want to set a color prompt, for instance, then you would look here, and there is a place where you can uncomment force color prompt yes, and then it will give you a color prompt. So we've looked at that before in the BASHRC file. You can also change more intense things about the prompt, but we're not going to focus on that today. So now you'll see that we have these aliases that are defined by the distribution here, and one of them is LL, the one that I showed you. So you already have some aliases that are defined by the distribution, and they live in your BASHRC file. So adding things to BASHRC will make it work for you. You can take your aliases, come down to the bottom here, and then you can open this in a text editor and you can add them. And I got a bunch of stuff defined down here, and we'll take a look at those in just a moment or two. So there's another way to add commands to the environment, and I want to show you that, and that is to generate a function. And generating a function will give you the ability to create a command that will accept arguments. See, another thing about aliases is that they don't like it if you have a command that you need to put information in. So let's talk about what an argument is for those of you who are new. Let us say that we have a command called twiddle. All right? And you want to twiddle a file. So what you would do normally is at the terminal you would type in twiddle and then the file name. This part of this is an argument right here. If you have an aliased command that is supposed to accept input, it may or may not work because the aliases kind of screw that up a little bit. Also, what if you want to create an alias that is way more than just one command? Maybe it's 2 or 3 or 4 commands. Then what you're going to want to do in this case is create a function. And this is going to look a little cryptic, and you're probably going to say, oh, I can't do that. Let me tell you what. When I took my Linux administrator's exam, the part that I did not do well at all on was scripting. Okay, if I can do this, anybody can. So don't let it scare you off. It's just a function. So let's look at what a function is. And I'm going to create a function here. Actually, I'm going to just give you the format. So the first thing that you start off with is the name of the function. Let's do this in a fresh text editor. It'll be easier to see, actually. Okay, so let us create the first part of the function here, which would be the name. So in this case, we're just going to say name. And this is the name of your command that you want to export to the environment. So we're going to create a command. We're not going to save it in a file anywhere. Of course, we're going to save it in .bashrc, but we are not going to save it by itself as its own script. So that's what kind of like functions are like little scripts that live within bigger scripts. Best way to think of it. So the name would be the command that you're doing. So if you wanted to create a command called twiddle, then you would call it twiddle. So there's a couple of formats for function. I'm using the one that works the best for me, but you can go look up functions, and if you think the other format will work better for you, then fine. So what we have here is a couple of parens, right and left, and then we're going to do a bracket there, the kind of curly Q bracket that has the little thing sticking off the end of it. And then you want to go ahead and enter, and you want to tab, and here is where you would type in your commands. Right here. So then you would type in, one command, then and so forth. When you're done, use your tab key, then type in return. Okay? And this is going to tell the system you're done. These are all the commands I need to do. Because what a function is going to do when it executes those commands is it's going to open up another process. It's going to open up a subshell. It's just going to run off and do it real quick, and then when it's done, it will return to the main shell. And that's why it's cool if you want to stick a bunch of commands in here, because it doesn't mess up your environment to do it. Okay, so now that we have put in our commands, then we just do this. And that's what it looks like. Pretty simple, huh? There's really not much to a function. It works quite easily. Now, once we have created a function and then we read it into the system, it's still not going to work, because what we need to do is take that function and we need to export it into our current environment so that we can use it as a command. And to do that, we would do export a function, and then the name of our function, which is in this case name. That's it. That's all the code there is to it. Here's where the fun begins, right here in the commands. This is where you can do all kinds of goofiness, and you can do whatever you need it to do here. So let me show you some functions that I have defined. I'm going to show you some functions and aliases that I have defined in my own BASHRC file. We can go ahead and close that without saving. So let's xed, new text editor in Linux Mint 18 here, I'm getting used to, and then .bashrc. Okay, so this is my current bash file, and I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom here. And what I have done is I have put comments in here that tell me exactly what I've done. Now, I'm calling them aliases here, but it could be Joe's stuff, whatever. And then for every one of these things that I have defined, I am actually putting a comment up here that tells me what it is. Now, it might seem a little bit ridiculous. Why do you got to put such detailed comments in here? Because if you do this and then you do like I do and you copy your BASHRC file from machine to machine to machine and you just keep it going forever, then you might want to look back at this later and try and figure out, well, what did I do? So what's the first thing that we have here? I have a variable here, or a function defined that I'm calling SSHIN. And what this does is it allows me to get into another up and running machine without having to type in the entire IP address. So remember, I told you that aliases don't like to take arguments. Well, functions don't mind at all. So in this case, I'm using the first argument, which is this variable right here, and I am telling the system, run this command. When I type this and a number, run this command, take the number, stick it in here, and then go off and log me into a system. Now, if I have another machine that's up, I'll be able to show you how this works. So I'm going to go SSHIN, and this machine may not be up. No, it is not up. So let's just, we'll log into ourselves. You can do that with SSH. Let's do 12. Okay, and it's going to ask me, do you really want to log into yourself? And I'm going to say, no, I ain't going to do it. But you get the idea. If that was working, then that would just dump me right into the session. So that's the first one that I have defined there. And the second one that I have defined is SSHINX, which just means that I issue exactly the same command, but this time I can use X apps through the X Windows applications through the terminal and have them display properly. So that's X forwarding. And then I have defined one here called SFTP, which does exactly the same thing. So if I want to fire up the SFTP program, which I did a video about not too long ago, then I can just type in SFTPN and then just the number. It's not necessarily that it's so hard to type that IP address. It's just that I keep getting it wrong. What I do is I add commas where the periods should be, and then that messes me up. So let's get into something a little bit deeper here. Okay, and this is this function to automate the update process. You may recall, long time ago, that I did a video where I showed you this particular script, and this has been a long time ago. And this is a very advanced little script to run updates on Ubuntu systems. So it could be Linux Mint, it could be Ubuntu, it really doesn't matter. And this thing does all kinds of crazy stuff. It starts the updates, it goes and grabs the information, and it also dumps everything into a log file that I had in my home folder. So that's what all of this extra code at the end here is for. And then, because this was a script, it was defined as a command, and so therefore I would throw that into like /user/local/bin, and then it would become system-wide, all that crazy stuff. Well, that's fine, but if you switch from one machine to the next, then keeping up with all of your little scripts that you got to dump in and restore, that can be a pain. If you can define it here in this one file, if you could get the same functionality with just a function, and all you have to do is back up one file, then why bother? You know what I mean? So that's exactly what this one does right here. So it's just a function, and I have defined this as being update, and then these are the commands that run, and then that's it. And then we export the update function to the environment. So there, you get a basic idea of how functions work. And then another thing that I wanted to point out here was this alias, and it's pretty much the only alias that I have defined here. And this one actually links to a program that I already use. So let's take a look at that particular script. So this is the script, a little program that I wrote to sync files between all my machines. So essentially, if I'm sitting at this machine, which is my main machine, I want to sync all the files to the other two workstations. So if I make a change here, it's going to show up there. It's a way of backing up. Plus, if this machine dies and I got to jump to another computer, as long as I've done this recently, then all my stuff should be there. So that's what makes it cool. Now, you see how many commands we have. This is not a terribly long script at all. No, but not by any stretch of the imagination. Bash scripts can be really long. This is a bit long to put in a function, though. If you're going to be doing more than 10, 15, 10 lines, then you don't want it in a function. Although, I have been toying with the idea of taking this and sticking it in there and running this as a function, because then it would be easier to deal with if I have to edit the functions that have to do with my own network. See, because as is, this works great as long as I have a router and I'm using the 192.168 network. And it follows this exact format. If my router dies, or I get a new one, or I decide to do something different, then these commands that are in here may not work. So this is not written in stone. If I have to go back and edit this or change it in some way, then I'd kind of like to make that easy. But for now, I'm keeping the little sync it program over in its own file. So what this alias does here, this one right here, is it just runs sync it twice. So I have called it sync all, and it'll run sync it, and then it'll run 14, which is my HP workstation that's in the back room, and then 17, which is another laptop. And as long as both of these machines are up and running, and that happens all the time because my kids are on one and Cindy's on another, this happens all the time, I can just run this command, and then quietly in the background, without anybody knowing it, rsync will take off and it will sync all my files up, and nobody knows the better. And I can also do the same thing with SSHN and update, because I have exported this BASHRC file to all of my machines. So no matter where I log in from, I'm going to get the same behavior, which is really cool. Okay, so let's talk a little bit now about files. That's the basic concept. The sky is the limit on what you can do in here. You can change this, and I encourage you to go off and look at that. But there's some things that I want to clear up for new users and for some of the more advanced users who just haven't messed around with this stuff. Where does all this information come from? That's the first thing that we want to talk about. Actually, before I even get to that, I want to go ahead and make sure that I put this in there. If you're going to mess around with your BASHRC file, then make sure that you create a backup copy before you do that. And it's really super easy to do. So cp .bashr and then .bashr, and we'll give it an extension like .bak. You can put anything on it you want. It's an old back. Just make sure that you make a copy of it. And if you turn it loose, now you're going to have a copy that's there. So if you mess up your BASHRC file, then you can go back and fix it. I don't know whether I said that already in the video, so I wanted to go ahead and get that out there. Okay, so let's talk about the files where all of this comes from. And I also want to clear up a little mystery. If you watched one of my recent videos about Linux Mint 18.1, I was sort of scratching my head because I didn't have a bunch of settings in the terminal, and I thought, what have they done? I have no BASHRC file. Nothing's working. I don't get it. Well, I figured out what was going on with that as well. So the first place, one of the first places that the system looks is in the etc directory. So let's switch over to that. Well, let's actually put the command in. How's that? There you go. That'll work great. Okay, so the first file that we want to look at is the profile command, or the profile file. What am I doing? I don't know. Cold medicine's kicking in. I can't think. Okay, so this is the profile, and this lives in the /etc or etc terminal. So this file is read every time any user on the system opens up a bash terminal. So it sets down some pretty basic commands. And the first thing that it's going to tell it to do is go look for a file called bash.bashrc. If it already exists, that's what this bunch of code right here does. It goes and looks for that file, and if it exists, then it loads stuff from there. So that's all profile does in the etc directory. So let's go ahead and look at the master bash RC files. That would be bash.bashrc. Now this is the BASHRC file which defines a default environment for any user that opens up the system. So if you do not have a .bashrc in your home folder, this is what's going to get read. That's what happened to me the other day when I opened up Linux Mint 18.1 and I didn't have any colors in my terminal and there was a bunch of stuff that wasn't there and I was sitting there going, what's going on? Linux Mint 17.3 doesn't create a .bashrc file for users. If you want to create one for yourself, knock yourself out. Open a text editor, call it .bashrc, add your aliases, your functions, your changes, whatever you want to do, and it will work just fine. But the Linux Mint 18 does. But what I did is I did an in-place upgrade, which meant that when I did that upgrade, the installer saw, hey, there's already a BASHRC file here, and it didn't change it. So it just got gornied up in the install. Now, if you change anything in this file here, anything at all, this is going to be system-wide. So if you add, for instance, an alias down here to the bottom, or you add something like screen fetch, which is a program that draws pretty ASCII art and gives you some information when you open a terminal. If you put it here, it's going to happen for every user on the system. The .bashrc will not negate anything that is defined in this file that isn't defined in the .bashrc file. And it's okay to have duplicates too. So if you had an alias defined here and it was the same alias and then you had it in the other, the system doesn't care. It just ignores that and goes, I already got that, thank you very much. So that's how this works when it finds these files. So the main thing to remember is about this particular file, which is bash.bashrc, is that this is system-wide. Now, if you are on Linux and you notice that you don't have one, let's say that you're on Linux Mint 18, you did an upgrade like I did, and you want to know where you can get a template. Maybe you don't want to start out with a blank page because you're just learning all this stuff. It'd be nice to have this stuff already here so you can poke at it. Then what you can do is just take a jaunt to another directory here called skell, which is in etc. It's your skeleton directory, and this is stuff that is predefined by the distribution. So let's do a ls and look for bashrc. and it is there. So let's actually look at the default BASHRC file. This is the one I didn't get because of the way I did my upgrade the other day. And to add one, all I would have had to done was just throw it in there. But what I ended up doing was adding my edited file, which I do all the time anyway, so it worked out in the end. What am I doing? I don't know. You're talking and typing at the same time. You can't do that stuff. Okay, so this is the one from the Skell directory. That's where we're at here. And so this is going to be the basic one that you're going to get when you install Linux Mint. Ubuntu already does this. Most distributions provide a BASHRC. So there you go. Okay. So if you need to get a template to work with, you can always copy this file over and you can start hacking on it, and there you go. And before we close out this video, let me show you one more little change that I made to my system. I'm not going to show you how I did it. If you want to do it, you can go do the research and figure out how to do it yourself. I'm mean like that. One of the things I changed, and I did this not too long ago, was that by default, Ubuntu and many other distributions give you a prompt that when you go into directories, it will show the full path. So I find knowing what user I am and what machine I'm on to be very useful, and I do like that to be colorized. And then it shows you the present working directory, and like I said, usually what Ubuntu does in those situations is if you go into a deeper directory, it'll show you everywhere that you are. So I'll give you a for instance here. Let's go to Documents. Okay, so I'm going to go into that, and now you see that I'm switched to Documents, which is my present working directory. Well, I happen to have a directory in here that is really long. It's got a long name. I got several directories with long names. And so therefore, I would like the system not to show the Documents directory in front of this here. Just show me the working directory that I'm in. Now, if I get confused and I'm like, well, where am I at? You know, maybe I'm in some other user account or something. There's always good old PWD. And that will tell me exactly where I am. So I can type that in at any given time. So what you can do is jump online and you can look up customizing your bash prompt, and then you'll find out what all the little goodies are in there. But I will show you one thing about it if you're going to do it on Ubuntu or Linux Mint, because figuring out where to do it can be a bit of a pain. So let me just get out of that directory, and then we are going to xed into .bashrc. Okay, and I want to show you where this information is kept. Remember we talked about the color prompt? Well, you need to come down here and find out where your prompt is defined to change this. This is your prompt, ladies and gentlemen, right here. If color prompt yes, then this is the one that counts if you have color set in your BASHRC file. So changes that you make is, see all this stuff in here, just this line just goes on and on and on, when really there's only a few things that you might want to change. Now, a lot of this has to do when you're using like Debian chroot, which allows you to change your root directory, and it tells the system what to do in those cases, what kind of prompt to give you. So be careful with this that you don't mess any of that up. Or if you don't care, you could always just define the prompt as being something simple. But so, you know, like to make the change that I made, yeah, I'll go ahead and tell you, I can't be that way. See here where it says this has this capital W? Well, the standard way to do that is a small w. And if you change that to a capital W, both here and here now, because these are your two prompt commands, depending on what terminals you're using, you change them both here and in here, and then it will do that. So there you go, I told you. But go look up prompts anyway, okay? Thanks for watching the video, gang, and I hope you found it very informative. Like I said at the beginning, this is not a definitive guide. This is an introduction to concepts. There's a lot more to this. Did I mention that you can create alias files? I think I did. So if you create a file and call it .bash_aliases, you can have lists and lists and lists of aliases. You can have the entire system doing something different than it ordinarily would do, like if you wanted to, and it should pick up on it, because in the BASHRC file, that's one of the things it looks for, is a file called .bash_aliases, and if it finds that file, that's where it loads your aliases from. So if aliases are something that really turn you on, you can do that. Just make sure I mention that. I think I did. And now that I'm repeating myself, I will stop. Do check out Easy Linux on Facebook, and if you do, give it a like. Check out Easy Linux on the web. We got some new stuff up there. We got wallpapers, ladies and gentlemen. People always asking for wallpapers. Well, it's on the website now, so go to easylinux.com and go grab you some of the wallpaper that you see in these videos. Also, check out freedompenguin.com. I've got a glowing review of Linux Mint 18.1 there that was just published not too long ago. You can read that. And we will be doing this again soon. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully the next time I record a video, I won't sound so much like a troll, and I won't have so much of a cold.